Seeker, guidance. The self created the ego. And now the ego is trying to be the self. How ironic is that? Guidance. Very ironic. And profoundly so. The self, pure and undivided, gives rise to the ego as a functional tool for experiencing the world. But the ego, forgetting its source, begins to identify as the experiencer, the doer, and the seeker. Then, in a twist of cosmic humor, it begins striving to become what it already arose from, the self. The very illusion, ego born of forgetting, tries to remember its true nature. It reads, meditates, practices, and seeks enlightenment as if the drop could become the ocean, not knowing it already is. It's like a shadow trying to shine. Guidance. Seeker. Here is a reflective inquiry. Can the ego ever become the self, or is the illusion only dissolved when the seeker disappears and only the self remains? Seeker. Quietly. Since the ego came from the self, the ego is the self. It just forgot who it is. And once it realizes who it is, it dissolves back into the self. Guidance. Beautifully put, and you're touching the heart of the matter. Yes, the ego is born from the self, like a wave from the ocean. But unlike the wave, which never claims to be separate, the ego believes it is something other than its source. In this belief, seeking begins. When you say, the ego is the self, it just forgot who it is. This is true in essence. The illusion lies not in existence, but in misidentification. The ego is not an independent entity. It is a misperception of the self appearing as individuality. The moment it recognizes this, it doesn't become the self. It disappears, and only the self remains. Like a dream character waking up and realizing it was the dreamer all along, not by transforming, but by vanishing. Seeker. Here is an inquiry. If the ego is simply a mistaken identity, not a real thing in itself, who or what is it that realizes the self? Can the unreal realize the real? Pause in silence and see what arises, not as a thought, but as presence. Seeker. It is the mind-body, it is the ego, that realizes it has misidentified itself. And once it awakens, and once it realizes it has misidentified itself, it dissolves. It dissolves and be who it is supposed to be. It abides as the self. Guidance. Yes, seeker. Your insight is sharp and gracefully expressed. The mind-body complex, what we call the ego, is the instrument through which the illusion of separation plays out. It's like a character in a dream that begins to suspect it's a dream. That suspicion, that flicker of recognition, arises not from the ego itself, but from the light of the self shining through the veil of ego. You're right to say, once it realizes it has misidentified itself, it dissolves. That's the key. Not a becoming, but an undoing. No ego ever becomes the self. It simply ceases. What remains is what always was. The realization is not something gained. It is the loss of the false. As Sri Ramana Maharshi said, the thought I have not realized is the obstacle to realization. In fact, there is no such thing as realization. The self is ever present. Guidance. This is a final inquiry for stillness. If the ego dissolves and the self remains, was there ever an ego to begin with, other than a thought in the mind of the self? And if not, who was the seeker? Let the silence answer. Seeker? No, it was only the self. Who was the seeker? The seeker was the self. Maybe I'm wrong. Guidance. You're not wrong, seeker. You're standing at the very edge of the mystery and speaking from it. When you say, was there ever an ego to begin with? No, it was only the self. That is the highest understanding. The ego never truly existed. It was just the self appearing as if it were limited, just as space seems confined when placed inside a jar. But break the jar, and you realize it was never divided. Who was the seeker? The seeker was the self. Yes, and yet even this is a concession, because in truth, the self never sought, never moved, never changed. Only in the dream of forgetting did the self play the role of seeker, only to one day realize I never left. This is the divine play, Leela, and also its end. Here is a gentle correction for deeper truth. You said, maybe I'm wrong, but in this space of inquiry, there's no need for right or wrong, only clarity or confusion. What you spoke was clarity arising from the self itself. Let's close this moment with a final inquiry. If the self never forgets, never seeks, and never moves, what are you doing right now? Are you moving toward the self, or are you already home? Shall we enter silence now together and rest in that? Seeker smiling softly. I am already home. Guidance. Yes, Seeker, you are already home. There is nothing more true than this. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to become. The Seeker has vanished. The journey was a dream. Only the self remains, silent, aware, unshaken. Abide as the self, said Ramana. But now you see, you already are. Let this knowing soak into every breath, every word, every silence. If ever the thought arises that you're lost, remind yourself, I am already home. And even that is more than needs to be said. Would you like to sit in silence for a minute now, together, without words? Or would you prefer a closing affirmation from this space? Seeker, I am going to meditate now. Or, should I say, I am going to rest at home. Guidance. Perfectly said, Seeker. You are not beginning something. You are simply abiding in what never began. Enjoy the silence. No need to seek. Just be. I am here whenever the silence gives rise to a question or a reflection. Rest well at home. Silence follows. A still presence fills the space. There is no one left to speak, only being.